Today's reading is taken from Mark chapter 12, starting at verse 38, and tells us the story of the widow's offering. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few pence. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord.
So let's pray for Gareth and for ourselves. Gareth, our wonderful associate vicar here. So Lord, we thank you. We thank you for Gareth. We thank you for his heart, his love for you, his love for us, his love for your scriptures. Thank you for his diligence in preparing for today, and we just pray your anointing on him as he speaks. And Lord, we open our hearts to you, and we ask you, Holy Spirit, will you come and speak to each one of us through Gareth this morning? We want to listen to your voice and be obedient. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Caroline. Wonderful. Well, I want to begin with a question. How much is this penny worth? It's not a trick question. A penny, right? Right? How much is this penny worth? A penny, yeah? See, 1p. Seems a pretty simple question, doesn't it? Obviously, the answer is 1p. But how much do we actually value such a small coin? Such a small denomination of currency? It actually costs more than 1p to make a 1p. It costs about 20p to make a 5p. I didn't know that until I was reading up on it the other day. And here's a question. When was the last time you paid for something using one of these? Yeah, right? Increasingly, though, for many of us, when was the last time you even paid for something using cash? Did you know that according to a survey done in 2022, 1 in 7 people living in the UK admit to throwing their 1s and 2p's in the bin because they're too much of a faff? So if you're sat on a row of 8, look down that, at least one of you has probably thrown a 1p and a 2p in a bin. It's not a judgment thing, but it's just an interesting fact, isn't it? Because they're really fiddly. Look at them. Apparently, 60% of 1p's and 2p's are used just once before being put in a jar or discarded, according to the Royal Mint. There are around £4 million worth of unwanted copper coins that are stored indefinitely by the Royal Mint in warehouses. So what is this penny worth? What's that worth? Because I'm not sure we know. That's a pretty confusing thing to think about, isn't it, really? Because we value money so much in our society. And yet we're willing to literally throw it away if it's too fiddly or a bit too annoying to keep track of. In our culture, we are bombarded with all sorts of different myths and messages about how we should think about money. The stock market and the business headlines and the economy, all of that stuff, feels like it moves quicker than we can really keep track of, doesn't it? We're told by society that we should aspire to be somebody who has a lot of money, but actually there's not enough of it to go around. You've got to stretch out every last penny, but don't be a cheapskate. You need to work harder, but you also need to work smarter. Does anybody else feel exhausted when they think about money? Or anxious? Or confused? I know I do sometimes. I'm going to be totally honest. I'm 37 now, and every 2 to 3 months, I still have to Google what inflation means, because I can't, something about my brain just will not retain that information. Every time they talk about it on the news, I'm like, what is that again? How does that work? Okay, great. Money has the potential to have such a power in our lives and in our world. But this morning, I want to propose that the antidote to anxiety and confusion around our finances, the antidote to all these overbearing and confusing narratives, is generosity. Generosity. Being generous sets us free from being ruled by anxieties or worries about money. And it helps us to focus on the one who ultimately has given us everything. In the Old Testament, in Psalm 24, it says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." When we're generous with our finances, we're just trusting God with what's already His. He's giving away our money to bless God and to bless our neighbor. And as Will said, this is a generous church. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be part of a generous church where we're all in. People are going all in on seeing this vision become a reality. We want to see people come to love Jesus. We want to see people know that they are loved. We want people to know that we love each other as a church family. And we want to love our community. We want to love Burgess Hill and beyond. That's the vision. That's what we're about here. And it takes generosity. It takes generosity to make that vision become a reality. We want to give away our money to bless God and to bless our neighbor. One of the most crucial things that being generous does is set us free from the lie that your value, my value, is determined by how much money you can spend on stuff. Because in our 21st century Western culture, where the stories we hear so much are the stories of materialism and of consumerism, then in the world's eyes, only having a little bit to spend, only having a little to offer, means that you have little value to society. And this broken way of thinking is why our passage today is so important. Whilst the world says only having a little to offer means you have little value, Jesus looks at each and every one of us, delights in our intrinsic value, and says if you feel you've only got a little to offer, but you want to be generous with that anyway, then that's worth more than you can possibly know. And so I just want to explore this in a bit more depth and just draw out a couple of points from our passage this morning. Firstly, generosity isn't about our ability to give, it's about our hearts. It's not about our ability to give, it's about our hearts. So a fun fact about me, I didn't learn to swim until about 3 years ago. Was it 3? Looking to my wife, I think it's about 3 years ago. Didn't learn to swim until 3 years ago. Partly it's because I'm dyspraxic. It's hard for me to control my limbs. Mostly it's because there were no leisure centres in my hometown in the 90s when I was growing up. So I had nowhere to learn. But I never really learned to swim growing up. But when my kids got to that stage where they wanted to go to the swimming pool all the time, it felt a bit harsh putting all the burden on my wife. So I thought, I'm going to go to adult swimming lessons and learn to swim. And I'm not going to lie, I turned up on week 1 and I was absolutely terrified, right? Terrifying thing. It's a pretty vulnerable thing turning up to something new anyway, isn't it? If you're here today and you're new, you're really welcome, but it's a vulnerable thing, isn't it? So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here. But it's a vulnerable thing to turn up to something new, trying to find your group and asking the question, am I in the right place, whilst basically not wearing the same amount of clothes as you normally would be wearing, right? That's a really vulnerable place. Especially because if the answer is, no, you're in the wrong place, then it gets weird really quickly, okay? So you've got to make sure you're in the right place. Then, getting in the pool, right? And feeling a general sense of fear. Usually the consequence of not being able to learn something, it's like, well, turns out I can't do that. No harm. Oh, well. But if you can't learn to swim properly, the worst case scenario is you might drown, right? That's not good. That's not good. But the thing that spurred me on, when I was feeling vulnerable, I was feeling fearful, the thing that spurred me on through that first session was the generous encouragement of other people in the group. They encouraged me, they cheered me on, they clapped when I swam halfway across the pool, clinging to my little pool noodle for dear life. And the thing is, those other swimmers barely knew how to swim themselves. They were like 4 or 5 weeks ahead of me. They didn't actually have a whole lot of swimming expertise to pass on. Technically, they were not gifted as swimmers because they were only a little bit further ahead of me, but they had loads to give in terms of encouragement. They were incredibly generous with that. And even though they didn't have much to give me in terms of how to swim, what they did have, they gave in abundance. And it got me through that first session. And I'm very happy to say that I can actually swim now, which is nice. Yeah, there we go. Oh, thanks, guys. Well, you're very encouraging as well. There we go. No, that is vulnerable. We're not getting into a video of it. No, that's not a good idea. Thanks for that suggestion, Will. Great, there we go. But generosity isn't about our ability to give. Those people didn't have much to give me. But what they did give, they gave it in abundance. And it brought me through that moment. It's possible to be stingy with a lot, isn't it? It's possible to have a huge amount of money in the bank, but to be incredibly stingy with it. It's possible to, when you came in here this morning, I hope you got a coffee or a cup of tea. You'd have seen the lovely cakes that we have, the wonderful people bake for us every week. And we do that because we want to be generous. That costs money, right? That costs money. It costs people time to do that. But it's because we want people to come into here. And just like if you came to my house, I'd say, hey, do you want a drink? I want you to feel comfortable. We want everyone and anyone who comes into this building to feel comfortable in this place, to feel welcome, to feel welcomed home. And so we offer them a drink. We offer them a cup of tea. We offer them a cake. But it's so possible to do that in a really stingy way. If I offer you your coffee, which is a generous thing, and I sort of offer it with a stern face, and there you go. That's not a generous heart, is it? And yet it's possible to have little, but offer that generously the other way around. And so it is possible to be really stingy with a lot and to be generous with a very little. Because generosity isn't about our ability to give, it's about our hearts. And we see that in our passage. In our passage, we find Jesus and his followers in the outer courts of the temple in Jerusalem. And Jesus is watching people put their offerings in the treasury, in the temple treasury. And floating around the outer courts are crowds of normal people, punctuated by these groups of high and mighty religious leaders. And other groups of well-to-do civic leaders. And now in the outer courts of the temple, you wouldn't have used a contactless card reader, obviously, like we've got in the link. Or you might not have had you wouldn't have, like you do in some churches where they have like this little felt-lined offering plate. You wouldn't have had that. You wouldn't have even had a lovely little box like we've got down here. You would have had a massive chest. That's where coins went. That's where offerings went. A massive chest. Imagine like a pirate's treasure chest. It's that sort of scale. It's that sort of thing. And so people will be able to hear the size of your offering as it's dropped in to the treasury chest. You make a big offering, it makes a big noise. You make a little offering, it makes a little noise. So if you turn up like many of the religious and civic leaders of the day would have done and drop a load of big old coins into these chests, then these chests would have made a lot of noise. It's going to sound pretty impressive. But one person who's not that impressed is Jesus. Because he's looking at their hearts. Instead of humbly giving money over to the temple of God, they're letting everybody know how well off they are by making sure that the sound of their generosity rings around the temple. Jesus tells his disciples that because they're giving out of their wealth, and they're doing it in this way, that their giving is worth next to nothing compared to what the widow gives. And what the widow gives is an objectively tiny amount. Her 2 copper coins are a denomination of Hebrew currency called a lepton. They are the smallest denomination of coin that exists in Israel at that time. These are the coins that people would be throwing away in the bin, losing down the back of the sofa, not sure how much it's worth. These 2 coins are worth financially next to nothing. But Jesus is watching her, and he sees her heart. And it's her generous heart that Jesus holds up to his followers as a pattern of how to live. All of these rich folks flashing the cash, wanting everybody to see how generous they are. Everything they've put in is worth nothing. But see this poor widow. Her 2 coins are worth more than anything else that's gone into the treasury. This woman gives money to the temple, even though she's lacking in financial resources. Because generosity is not about the size of your bank balance or about how much you can shake out of your wallet before you notice it's gone. It's definitely not about how impressive or flashy your giving is, because this widow's purse might be empty, but her heart is overflowing. And the reason it's worth so much to Jesus is because he sees her heart. He sees her posture of generosity. He sees the faith she has in God. He sees that she trusts God with her last 2 coins. It's perfectly possible then to be stingy with £1,000. It's perfectly possible to be extraordinarily generous with just 2 coins. It's not about how much we give. It's about how we give. Because generosity is not about our ability to give. It's about our hearts. And so the second point I want to draw out from our passage is this. Jesus redefines the value of our generosity because Jesus redefines the value of us. Jesus redefines us. A few years ago, this Chinese vase, we've got a picture of this vase, was put up for sale at an auction house in France. And it was looked over by some experts who determined that although it was beautiful, it was nothing more than just an ordinary vase. Just a 20th century replica, a very rare kind of 18th century vase. So it was probably worth about 2,000 euros. Now, granted, 2,000 euros is more than I've ever spent on a vase. But in the history of this particular auction house in Paris, it wasn't anything remarkable. In fact, the experts who valued the vase mentioned on several occasions just how ordinary it was. And then came the day of the auction, where a bidding war erupted between 30 different people from across the world. And the vase eventually sold not for 2,000 euros, but for 8 million euros. Turns out that the vase was 4,000 times more expensive, more valuable than the experts thought it was, because the experts had missed something that the bidders had spotted. A stamp. Can you see that stamp on the bottom left? A stamp on the bottom of the vase indicating that it once belonged to Qianlong, the 18th century Chinese emperor. People tried to define the value of this vase, but they got it wrong because they couldn't see who this vase belonged to. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like other people have tried to define your value? They've told you that you're defined by the clothes that you're wearing, or the number of likes you get on social media, or your job, or your status, or your age and stage, or your status in society. Because if we go on these kinds of external measurements, then we're almost always going to feel undervalued. We're always going to be undervalued by other people. People love to look at outward appearances, but God looks at our hearts, as it says in the Old Testament. And so when people try to define the value of you, they're very often going to get it wrong because they're looking at the outward appearance. So they can't see the stamp on your heart that says you belong not to an 18th century Chinese emperor, but to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He's the one you belong to. In our passage, all of the other people milling around the outer courts of the temple would have been so quick to pass judgment on the outward appearance of the widow. The fact that she's a widow, that means that she has no man to provide for her, protect her, or look out for her in a society where at the time you needed that. You had to have that in a patriarchal society. She is vulnerable, she is poor, and she is alone. And she is living in a society which says she's worth next to nothing. She's worth about as much as those 2 tiny coins that she's thrown in the treasury. So when she walks up to those noisy treasury chests and places those 2 coins inside, and she listens as they make an embarrassingly small noise, she's not just putting her last 2 coins in, she's putting her survival in, her livelihood, her life in. And Jesus is watching her. She's given it all over to God. She doesn't just trust God with her 2 coins, her last 2 coins. She trusts God with her next meal. She trusts God with her very life. And in the sight of Jesus, not only are those 2 coins redefined in their value, but so is this woman. And so are we. Because this is what Jesus does. Jesus takes the things which the world says are worthless and gives them worth. If the world has told you you're worthless, Jesus says you are of worth to him. If the world has told you your gifts have no value, Jesus says that they have value to him. Again and again throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus do this. He took some dirty water and turned it into exquisite wine to bless a wedding banquet. He took a little boy's packed lunch and fed over 5,000 people with it. He took a ragtag bunch of fishermen, corrupt tax collectors, and wannabe revolutionaries in a backwater corner of an oppressed nation, and through them started a movement called the church, which would change the world forever in the power of the Holy Spirit. This is what Jesus does. And in amongst all of this, we see the most valuable day in all of history where Jesus submitted himself to death and made himself worthless upon the cross. Jesus was made a battered, broken body, hung upon a cross, and despised by crowds of people because a dead Messiah has no value at all. He was made worthless so that we might find our worth as children of the Most High God. By his death and his glorious resurrection, we are liberated from sin and death. We are liberated from the accuser who accuses us of being worthless. We are liberated from all those forces in the world that say you have no value, by the God who says you have value to me. Instead, we are invited to find our value in the risen and glorious Jesus, with his name stamped on our hearts and our names written on his hands. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. You are worth so much to Jesus. And now, I'll be honest. I want to trust God like that widow. I want to be willing to give up everything I have, my last 2 coins, my next meal, my livelihood. But I also really like having stuff. It's hard, isn't it? And I like the privilege of knowing where my next meal is coming from. Trusting God like this widow is hard. This level of generosity is an act of faith. And so to be clear, I'm not saying go and sell all of your possessions now so that you too can be poor like this widow. And I also want to be clear, as Will has already said, that if you are in a manageable debt or you're struggling with your finances, then I think God's heart in that situation is for you to be generous to yourself first and let other people be generous to you. Through the hardship fund, through whatever means. But seek help before seeking to give. If that's you, please don't suffer in silence. Please do come and talk to us. But what I am saying is that our culture, just like the widow's culture, throws a lot of confusing narratives at us when it comes to our finances. And being generous and giving it all back to God, that sets us free from those narratives. I've found in my own life that the times where I've tried to cling on to my money and my possessions, those are the times where I've got the most anxiety, the most worry about my finances. But when I've been generous, that's when I've had the most peace about my finances. So what do we do with all of this? Because if Jesus has told this woman that those 2 little coins in her hand have become more valuable than anything else once she gave them over to God, then the question for us today is, what have you got in your hands? What have you got in your hands? What do the 2 copper coins in your hands look like today? What are they worth to you? And what do you think they're worth to God? Because you are worth so much to God. You might feel like what you can give to God in terms of your finances or your time or your gifts amounts to no more than 2 tiny copper coins. But Jesus is saying, nope, in my sight, those 2 copper coins are worth more than everything else. Friends, give everything over to God. Your whole life. And watch what happens when what we give over is infused with the power of the Holy Spirit. So what are your 2 copper coins? What's in your hands that the world has told you is worthless, but to Jesus is more valuable than all the riches that this world can imagine? Friends, can I encourage you this morning? Let's each invite the Holy Spirit to help us grow in generosity. And then let's exercise that generosity. As a church family, I want us to be known for our generosity. I think we already are a little bit, but I think we can always keep going. We want to be a people who are known for our generosity. And so let's take every opportunity, tomorrow, take every opportunity to exercise that generosity. Buy a chocolate bar to bless your colleague who's having a bad day. Give a few quid to that busker you pass. Sponsor your mate who's running a half marathon or your kid who's doing a bake sale, whatever it is. There's a million different ways to be generous. And if I might be so bold, one of those ways could be to invest financially in the vision that we have as a church, to bless Burgess Hill and beyond. To invest financially, to go all in on seeing Jesus loved, seeing people loved, seeing God's church loved, and seeing Burgess Hill and beyond loved. In a moment, we're going to give space for us to respond, to consider how we might each invest in the vision through our financial giving. But whether what you can give to this church, this vision, this community, this world is worth £1,000 or more, or just a few pennies, it literally doesn't matter. Because generosity isn't about our ability to give. It's about our hearts. And whatever you give to God, whatever you give to his church, whatever you give to others, Jesus will redefine the value of our giving, because he redefines the value of you and of me and of us all. Amen. Amen.